Sì, alcuni. No, lui faccio parte di Catechetical.
Sapevo che c'era uno
They're also getting bombed. When is it? Huh? Next week. Oh. Actually, planning for morning. Doctoral will be president. So he had some other commitment.
For the grade, 40 for the second one. The one who is not for 20 points and 9.
But he gives it only from
The last
from the discussion. Yeah, here in the discussion, each one of us gives out 30. It has only 12, value of 20. Very interesting. This is part of the reality. Welcome.
Vediamo il costo, questo abbiamo un po' accettato, c'è il costo un po' e tu? Niente giocare. Dopo? Prima farà forza.
Life is going on.
Live. So they can ask you. Are you on already?
Already, yes. Only some people
Okay, you like that? But you must get the. You must get the best also. The best place is for the Mauro standard.
You can't do that. Respectful to the student.
Salve. Sì, sì.
Io avevo fatto
During discussions like
It's already on, huh? Huh? People will be.
Ma forse io mi ero anche chiesto se, essendo magari degli studi eccetera seguiamo tutte le cose che hanno fatto, se proprio alla fine non ci fosse magari diciamo, rientrando tra le ricerche, io so che magari anche se gli dicono di andare a 1000 euro per la cosa su San Francesco di Sales, però se è una possibilità. Sì, sì. Perché tra l'altro c'è invece il secondo volume delle ricerche Francesco di Sales in quella che è la carta del a me hanno chiesto una prestazione ma poi l'idea culturale come
Technicians are not at work, huh?
gliel'ho detto c'era tutto quello che mi attribuisce Francesco di Sales, quindi se lo fa la facoltà benissimo, ovviamente fai scrivere cioè facoltà di teologia
Non ce n'è più.
Bene, buon pomeriggio, benvenuti a tutti. Cominciamo questo atto accademico. Un saluto cordiale alle autorità accademiche presenti, il decano della Facoltà di Scienze dell'Educazione, il decano della Facoltà di Teologia, il nostro visitatore Don Arocchiam Canaga, il direttore della comunità di cui fa parte il candidato, Don Miro Sepeda. Grazie a tutti i colleghi. È interessante anche il tema che verrà presentato perché è proprio un luogo di convergenza di diverse competenze su cui le nostre discipline possono dialogare. E grazie al segretario generale che ha allestito questo momento. È un giorno in cui l'università, grazie a Dio, si è anche ripopolata. Non soltanto abbiamo i nostri studenti oggi pomeriggio, ma anche i giovani delle scuole superiori di Roma che fanno l'esame di spagnolo dell'Istituto Cervantes. Siamo stati molto contenti di poterli accogliere qui, ovviamente seguendo tutte le norme di sicurezza, e abbiamo la gioia, lo è sempre per una difesa di tesi dottorale, ma oggi in modo particolare un confratello salesiano di una delle nostre comunità all'interno del campus universitario, anche nella previsione di una collaborazione sempre più intensa e strutturata con un istituto, quello di Catechetical, che ci sta particolarmente a cuore all'interno della nostra università. Allora, Don Antony Christy Dunatan, che presenta la sua tesi dal titolo Intercultural Catechetical Pedagogy in the light of an empirical study of catechetical pedagogy in the pluricultural context of Tamilnadu in India. Come facciamo normalmente, daremo a lui la parola per la preghiera con cui apriamo questo atto. Ci siamo messi d'accordo su una presentazione del suo lavoro che non superi i 30 minuti, al 29esimo minuto e 50 secondi lo interromperò, e poi il dialogo con i membri della commissione, che appunto sarà per ciascuno di non più di 20 minuti. Sono lieto di presentarla, il direttore dell'Istituto della Tesi, il professor Don Francis Vincent Antony, che è docente ordinario della Facoltà di Teologia per la cattedra di Teologia Pratica Generale, il professor Don Salvatore Currò, docente stabilizzato nella Facoltà di Teologia per la cattedra di Pastorale Giovanile Generale e attualmente anche direttore del nostro Istituto di Teologia Pastorale, e il professor Don Emanuele Rusoni, docente straordinario sempre nella Facoltà di Teologia per la cattedra di Teologia Sistematica 2 che riguarda l'ecclesiologia e l'ecumenismo. Allora possiamo cominciare, diamo la parola a Don Antony Christy.
Grazie. Cominciamo. Preghiera nel nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo. Spirito del Dio vivente, ti lodiamo e ti glorifichiamo per tutta la saggezza che ci offri come luce per il nostro cammino. Concedici la grazia di non sprecare mai questo dono, ma che restiamo sempre aperti alle tue vicissitudini. Ti supplichiamo, sii con noi e illuminaci, tu che vivi e regni con il Padre e il Figlio per secoli dei secoli. Amen. Maria, sede della sapienza, nel nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo.
Amen. Allora a te la parola, il candidato ha preparato anche una presentazione che ci aiuterà per comprendere anche gli aspetti del suo lavoro, quindi invito la Commissione, ci portiamo sotto in modo che tutti possano vedere. Grazie.
Dear and Reverend Father Mauro Mantovani, Director Magnifico, my respected guide, readers, and my dear friends, a very warm greeting to one and all. I consider it my honor to present before this august gathering my doctoral research titled Intercultural Catechetical Pedagogy in the light of an empirical study of catechetical pedagogy in the pluricultural context of Tamilnadu, India. The thesis consists of 3 parts. The thesis consists of 3 parts and 6 chapters. 3 parts correspond to the 3 phases the work has passed through. The first part, which corresponds to the theoretical phase, has 2 chapters. The first chapter presenting an overview of intercultural theology and intercultural communication, and the second chapter an overview of intercultural pedagogy, eventually delineating the space where the 3 disciplines encounter each other and offering a framework of intercultural catechetical pedagogy. The second part corresponds to the empirical phase and contains the 3rd chapter, which presents the method and process of research, and that is the grounded theory method that was used for research on the data gathering process that was carried out. The 3rd part corresponds to the strategico-projectual phase that contains 2 chapters. The 5th chapter that re-envisions ICP in the light of the research analysis, and the 6th chapter formulates strategies and criteria for an ICP praxis. That said, let us now pass on to the summary of the thesis. Faith is a personal response to the self-revealing divine. And be it in communities or as individual persons, it has to be a response that involves the whole person or the entire experience of the community. Can this be devoid of the all-important dimension of human experience called culture? Understood in various ways, culture is a pervasive term that is used to refer to the way human persons and communities organize themselves in a society. Globalization, the profuse spread and prevalence of the social network, and the highly advanced means of transportation among so many other developments have brought societies today much closer than ever imagined. Although the world gets defined as a global village, the differences and the peculiarities, the specific experiences and concrete life situations can never be taken for granted. This phenomenon of difference and specific experiences is true in all realms of human living: personal, interpersonal, social, intercommunitarian, and global. Not merely individuals, but also cultures are brought side by side, necessitating an interaction among them. And so, interculturality can by far be considered an indispensable experience owing to the fact that multiculturality is a universal experience. Within Christian faith expression, the same challenge is seriously posed, that we wake up and we take up interculturality as a call and a commitment. Such a challenge underlines the pertinent need to make the process of catechesis, that is the process of education to faith, sensitive to interculturality, and to find the right theological foundation and pedagogical approach to such a process. That is what is referred to by the term intercultural catechetical pedagogy. Intercultural catechetical pedagogy can be understood as an approach within the process of education to faith, made possible as a result of a sustained encounter among the disciplines of intercultural theology, intercultural communication, and intercultural pedagogy. It is an outcome of sustained life-defining interactions between Christian faith, local culture, and the coexisting cultures in a community. It is a pedagogical mindset which understands Christian maturity at one and the same time as a process of deepening personal identities, fostering interpersonal meanings, developing enlightening interdependencies, and promoting universal solidarity, grounded on a holistic vision of faith rooted in a culture. The general objective of this study was to evolve an adequate framework for ICP as a means to renew the catechetical process by understanding, interpreting, and enhancing the intercultural approaches to catechesis. Exploring the above-mentioned triad of disciplines, namely intercultural theology, intercultural communication, and intercultural pedagogy, the study identifies the necessary competences to be developed, the ICP competences. It analyzes the ICP context and the ICP conditions in order to establish the possibilities of ICP praxis. The study formulates strategies and criteria for an ICP praxis that prepares persons and communities in pluricultural context to live their Christian faith to the full. Theology is not only faith-seeking understanding, but also faith-communicating understanding, affirms Thomas Aquinas. Intercultural theology, the space where the experience of interculturality and the process of theologizing encounter, beckons every Christian faithful and the community to be rooted, open, hospitable, critically receptive, and concretely committed to building up humanity. Systematic theology, missiology, ecumenics, comparative theology, theology of religions, and various other disciplines and sub-disciplines contribute to a shared ideal, assuming intercultural theology as an approach. Intercultural theology can operate as a discipline in itself, finding its appropriate methodology and tools as a Christian theology, encountering other theologies, churches, religions, and entire humanity theologically, committing itself to solidarity and fullness of life for all. The specific intercultural theology competences identified as necessary to enhance an ICP praxis are dialogic personalization of faith, which consists of comparative understanding of one's faith vis-a-vis the faith of one's brothers and sisters, critical interpretation of one's experience of faith and culture, and collaboration with persons and communities of varied cultures. Prophetic challenging of faith, which involves recognition of the power equations in the cultural context and faith community, ratification of the personal identity formation, and in and through concrete experiences of life and recommendation of the theological bonum for a life of witness. And thirdly, cohesive exchange of faith, which respects equality of all in the expression of their faith, the eagerness manifested by each and in general to learn from the others and their experiences, and the level of empathy in engaging with each other towards universal human solidarity. Communication is exchange of ideas, convictions, values, and beliefs, using means and methods in order to create common understanding and coexistence. Intercultural communication, the interactive process of negotiating shared meanings across cultures, determines the logic, methodology, and functionality of ICP as a praxis. With the two prominent forces of this age, globalization and technological advancement, influencing almost all walks of human life, faith and faith sharing have to be aided by intercultural communication. Intercultural communication is in its crux about mutual respect and commitment towards building a community of persons who assist each other in growth and maturity. Persons and communities are effectively prepared and sustained through a holistic identity negotiation process, eliminating to the maximum the anxiety and uncertainty involved in encountering the other. The wholesome capacity for intercultural communication helps one deal with the all-important phenomenon of face work in an interactive context where the level of authenticity is mutually enhanced, building up interpersonal, intergroup, international, and intercultural solidarity. Intercultural communication attends to crucial factors within ICP, such as the communication process, contextuality of the process, behavioral appropriateness, perceptual clarity, spatio-temporal consciousness, personal identity, and sensitivity to the other. An effective intercultural communicator has 4 profiles to be duly strengthened: affective, cognitive, behavioral, and moral. Specific competences that this discipline brings to ICP can be identified in terms of these profiles. The affective, which accounts for intercultural flexibility and sensitivity. The cognitive, which involves epistemological sincerity and linguistic adequacy. The behavioral, promoting intercultural interaction and intercultural dialogue. And moral dimension, which insists on mutual respect and responsibility all through the process. Pedagogy is a science of constructing for a specific content the most apt discourse and most efficacious communication that would offer not merely a knowing but also convictions, propositions and promotions that would result in holistic transformations. Intercultural pedagogy hence could be seen as the very mode of organizing social life in pluricultural context, influencing the ideas, beliefs, convictions, perceptions and processes of passing on a culture from one generation to the next. It is essentially dialogic, critical, emancipatory, interruptive and effective. It upholds values and principles that promote solidarity without taking for granted the personal and inviolable dignity of every person involved. Coexistence and collaboration and creation of common space are considered unfailing means of working towards solidarity. The process is defined through interpersonal and intercultural interaction and dialogue, critical awareness and management of conflicts, and optimum use of advanced communication technology and globalized processes that are available. Intercultural pedagogy is naturally affected by epistemological, cultural, socio-economic, geopolitical, ethical, anthropological, ecological and varied other factors that impact knowledge, sources of knowledge and ways of knowing in a particular time and space. It depends directly also on the operators within the pedagogical scenario to take this approach forward. Educators, teachers, parents, adults and elders, friends, peers, collaborators and others, along with those who are going through the process of education. The specific competence that intercultural pedagogy brings to ICP are critical learning teaching capacity that involves comparative learning, taking the differences in the context into account, contributive learning that stresses mutuality in the process, and challenging learning that impels towards change. Secondly, collaborative resource building, the terms of knowledge capital, social capital and cultural capital, and thirdly, common space creation. That consists of a sensitivity to the third space or tertiaritarianity, which can be arrived at through authentic search that leads to clarity, dialogue that leads to transcendence, and commitment that leads to solidarity. The three componential disciplines network with each other to form the framework of ICP. I'm very sorry. Yeah. The three componential disciplines network with each other to form the framework for ICP. Intercultural theology as a content provider for ICP makes the persons involved and the process itself recognizant of the pedagogy of God, manifested in the process of revelation and covenant that becomes eternal sign of God's presence amidst God's people. Intercultural theology takes on the characteristics of communication theology, underlining the importance of relationships in faith experience and faith sharing. Intercultural communication as a process guide for ICP orients catechesis to become a practical communication of a lived theology, that is, faith interpreted in daily experiences and daily life experiences made sense of in the light of faith. It renders catechesis in its very nature a pedagogy of communication. Intercultural pedagogy, the immediate model for ICP, reiterates the importance of a model for the process of ICP and delineates the competences necessary for it. It develops itself into a pedagogy of intercultural competence, preparing in the persons and the community with readiness, capacity and commitment for promoting experiences of interculturality as a concrete sign and expression of the reign of God. At the end of the first phase, we arrive at a theoretical framework that can serve as sensitizing concepts and provide us with sensitizing categories with which we can look forward to grounded theory data gathering. On page 9 of the handout given to you, we have the concept map as a result of the first phase. This shall be re-envisioned once the research data is gathered and analyzed. Now we move to the second part, the empirical analysis. The research method The research method used to analyze the context is grounded theory method, a method of theorizing from the grounded reality discovered by Anselm Strauss and Barney Glaser, who however very shortly later split due to difference in perspective. Such differences have given rise to many versions of GTM. The one that is adapted for the purpose of research here is constructivist grounded theory developed by K.T. Sharmas. It is apt for our purpose here because it does not absolutize classical GT claim that all GTM research should be for theory generation. The CGT, that is constructivist grounded theory, finds theory modification to, in some way, a generation of theory. GTM follows what is known as abductive reasoning, which is opposed to deductive reasoning and a variation of inductive reasoning. It is an intuitive logic that looks out for an hypothesis anywhere in the process of inductive reasoning and sets out to generate a theory with probabilities. For this research, 11 interviews, 12 focus group discussions, and analysis of 2 textbooks were carried out with GTM approach to provide data to understand to an extent the context, the experiences, and the conditions existing in the catechetical scenario of the church in Tamilnadu, India. The entire transcript of the interviews and FGDs are documented in the research data documentation file, while the identity and consent forms of the participants are secured apart in the research classified data file for the sake of privacy. The details of the schools where focus group discussions were held and the details of the interviewed are tabulated in the handout for your perusal. For the interviews, the criteria of choice of the persons were that they would be prominent persons who have meaningfully correlated the various cultural and intercultural factors to their own life of faith and ministry within the church. Persons who have made difference in social, religious and cultural field. In short, persons with considerable experience of interculturality in the Church of Tamilnadu. Each of the interviewed is given a code to respect anonymity. The codes are given in the table along with the field of expertise and contribution that they have made. For the focus group discussion, there were 6 schools chosen and the consent acquired from the authorities for 2 discussions in each school, one with a group of teachers and the other with a group of senior students. As per the guidelines given for ideal focus group discussions, the schools were asked for minimum of 5 participants and a maximum of 10 for each of the discussions. The catechism prescribed for class 12 and 11 higher secondary level were chosen for analysis and due permission was obtained from the Commission for Catechetics in Tamilnadu Bishops' Conference, and the center at Dindivanam coordinates the catechetical processes in at least 18 of the 21 Catholic dioceses of Tamil Nadu, prescribes a uniform text for catechesis in the schools. The details of the texts obtained are furnished in the table. The data analysis has been carried out with the help of a qualitative data analysis software NVivo, a versatile tool in constructing research, be it in tracking the process of data collection, organizing the process of data analysis, the reconstruction of methodological strategies, the interpretation of material gathered, or the creative process of conceptualization. The version of the software used for this research is NVivo 12. One of the key elements of the analysis is codes and coding. It is breaking the data up into conceptual fragments which can be restructured and reunited to enable a theory to emerge. Query is the term used for various ways in which data is accessed and explored. Some simple culling out of details from the data, while others are more complex correlation of elements within. Wish to show you just a few samples of these queries used for analysis. A word cloud, which helps to identify the words that are prominently used in a discussion. Word frequency table, which gives the most frequent words used in a discussion. Text search query that analyzes a term in relation to its context and conceptual links to the rest of the discussion. This is a report tabulated of how data is organized and sorted in the software for analysis and for ready access. Coding comparison is a query that can be used to compare concepts spoken of by varied groups. Here is a comparison between student group and teacher group in a particular school. On the left, we have codes related specifically to students. On the right, we have that of the teachers. The center codes are concepts that are shared by both the students and the teachers. A matrix coding query helps in identifying the prominent areas of interest of specific persons or groups. A cross-tab query helps in identifying a particular concept in relation to various other variables. These are just a few of the queries used in analysis, some of which are added in the appendix as part of the thesis. The rest are documented in the research data documentation file. The data interpretation phase considered the varied analytical cues provided by the software and broke the entire data into properties, categories, and core categories for further conceptualization. The process of data analysis began from 741 labels assigned to the data and arrived at 5 core categories that comprise of codes, properties, and categories, all linked by logical and componential interrelation. Core categories are the nearest to theory generation in a GTM parlance. They indicate the emergence of a theory from the data thus far analyzed. The 5 core categories can be grouped further into 3. The first 3 core categories come together to form what can be termed ICP competences. Though it is true that these 3 core categories had been defined along with the 10 categories and their corresponding 26 properties from the theoretical framework transposed as sensitizing categories for analysis, every one of them have earned their place into the grounded conceptualization. Their place has been ratified by their presence in the terms of references made to them by the participants in the FGDs and interviews. Apart from the 3 categories, namely Intercultural Catechetical Competence, Intercultural Communication Competence, and Intercultural Pedagogy Competence, there emerged 2 other core categories: catechetical processes adapted to the present, which brings into play the elements, principles, tools, and protagonists of the catechetical enterprise, and faith culture encounter in Tamilnadu, an essential condition without which it is impossible to propose an ICP. These two are termed ICP context and ICP condition respectively. With the data interpreted, formed into core categories and categories, we move to the third part, the strategic of projectual phase, which looks to strategize the ICP praxis and offer criteria to ensure and enhance the desired practice. The ICP projectual perspectives. ICP strategies are conceived not as mere action plans or how-to-do recipes, but as practical orientational guidelines that can make intercultural catechetical pedagogy workable in a pluricultural context. They consist of educating persons to know faith and live it as a spirituality, educating them to receive the shared faith as an essential dialogue of life, educating them to broaden faith by social interaction and deepen it with social commitment, educating to face the challenges of lived faith and to grow in it consciously as a sign of continual transformation of self and faith community, and educating persons to the process of faith formation and accompaniment in the process of maturing in faith. ICP criteria are the praxis indicators, while the strategies enable the promotion and sustenance of ICP praxis in a context. There are certain fundamental criteria which can serve as indicators of the praxis, to recognize them where they are operative, to enhance and to promote them. The basic of these criteria is the personal disposition of inner freedom and gratuitousness that persons in the community of faith develop from within, leading them to an evangelizing testimony of life, martyria, lived out in building solidarity. A second criterion is the interpersonal dimension of communication competence in terms of interpersonal, intercultural, and intergroups communication, which gets concretized in terms of reaching out, diaconia, to the others, and especially to the marginalized. Thirdly, the pedagogical commitment of educability and the passion for true knowledge that sets persons and communities on constant journey towards discovery of the knowledge of God and God's universal salvific message, kerygma. Fourthly, a criterion from perspective of the community to foster authentic relationships of universal brotherhood and sisterhood that begin within the community and extend to the other communities of faith and to the entire humanity, promoting communion, koinonia, not in spite of differences, but in and through the richness that difference and diversity bring to humanity. A fifth criterion is the catechetical intuition about the vocation that every Christian faithful and faith community has to grow towards being reign persons and to live it every day in a faith that is lived and celebrated liturgia. From the analysis and interpretation of the data, there are recommendations offered in favor of ICP praxis. 5 prominent recommendations can be highlighted here. The first of the most prominent indications from the research study pertains to the Tamil culture. The study indicates, as the theory does too, that an ICP needs to take the local culture seriously. It recommends that the rational nature of the Tamil culture and the strong relational component that can be identified in the culture and the shared common heritage of Tamil tradition and history can be utilized much more within the pedagogical praxis if it is intended to be intercultural. A second indication could be drawn from the 4 most rated specific capacities among the ICP competences. The insistence on the critical interpretation of faith proposes a faith development perspective. As explained by the stages of faith development, the faith of a person or a community cannot endlessly remain in an intuitive or mythical level, nor can it be complacent with a conventional or individuative stage. A catechetical pedagogy that is intercultural by its very nature and definition would challenge a person towards a deeper level of faith that is conjunctive and universalizing. Faith development perspective already takes care of the capacity for equality in expression of faith and empathy in engagement. In its level of critique and altruism, the recommendation of theological bonum or promotion of innate goodness of human persons becomes a sign of healthy practice or holistic living of faith. ICP would therefore recommend a pedagogical practice that treats faith education as a means to faith development or a faith life integration. The third indication could be from 2 competences that stand out in the research analysis as most referenced: cohesive exchange of faith and common space creation. The first, an intercultural theology competence, and the latter, the intercultural pedagogy competence. The rising communal divide and the ever-present caste divide are 2 powerful corrosive forces, among others, that make the society in India vulnerable in its core. Education to faith as to prepare persons and communities not only to understand their faith, but also to understand and respect the faith and faith expressions of others. ICP would take the responsibility of imbibing in the Christian faithful the capacity to create common space by proactive measures that make faith a lived commitment to reign values. One of the realities in the context of Tamilnadu that ICP can take advantage of is the small Christian communities or basic Christian communities, SCCs or BCCs. A further development of SCCs in some other parts of India, mainly in the north, where the membership in these communities is extended to persons of other faiths who are willing to participate in activities of goodwill and social welfare, are called BHC, Basic Human Communities, or NHC, Neighborhood Human Communities. It would be apt for ICP to promote such models motivated by the principle of intercultural proaction. The fourth indication from the study could be the response of the teacher catechist and student catechist regarding the text prescribed for catechesis. While they both in some degree agree that the text is informative, they are almost unanimous in declaring that it is boring, uninviting, taxing, and when considered along with the other subjects of study which are demanding at school. The indication is a reinforcement of the fact that the process of catechesis is not merely about information to be passed on, but a moment when a person learns to live faith, share faith, and be transformed by faith. The study, with a theoretical framework as verified by the empirical research, can offer an effective guideline in preparing a text, keeping in mind ICP competences, the ICP context, and ICP conditions. Although the process of catechesis is not restricted to the text that is prescribed or used in the process, the latter does play a vital role in influencing the effectiveness of process by offering the initial material to set the person's thinking and goads them to action and life orientation, eventually leading to personal and community transformation. A final indication that could be considered arises from the part of the emerging themes, where the data analysis highlights 3 themes as prominently emergent. The first theme, intercultural faith sharing, which has been proposed predominantly by student catechists and considerably by the experts, while the teacher catechists have gone low on this proposal. The indication could be that the teacher catechists are more intent on teaching than on sharing, while the experts and the young wish that catechesis becomes more process of faith sharing. This augurs well with ICP because the way faith is shared during the formative and educative moments will be reflected in the way it is shared in the life and interactions of persons involved. The second theme, intercultural community building, has been accentuated almost equally by the student catechists and teacher catechists, and to a certain extent also by the experts. It is comprehensible that the experts do not give the student-teacher class interaction the highest of prominence in the process of community building. The indication from the prominence of the theme underscores the importance of considering community building in the context of interculturality as an integral part of faith education. The third theme, intercultural justice initiatives, which is not essentially about the concept of justice, but about initiatives to be undertaken in favor of justice, has been proposed to prominence by the experts and the teacher catechists. The fact that the student catechists do not refer to it could be an indication that at present it is not in practice and that there should be more attention paid to such initiatives as part of the catechetical pedagogy. In conclusion, evangelization and education are intimately connected ministries in the church. One makes the other meaningful, plausible, and progressively exigent. Evangelization demands an education that is holistic, and education makes the process of evangelization more conscious and informed. In these lines, and reflecting on the phenomenon of new evangelization, the Salesian Society of Don Bosco, in its 23rd General Chapter on educating the young people to the faith, initiated a broad reflection on this intrinsic rapport. The then Rector Major of the Society, Egidio Vigano, observed in his presentation that the new evangelization requires a concretely new education. He described it as a spirituality and a pedagogy inspired by Don Bosco's system of education, known popularly as preventive system, and referred to the need to grow in the pedagogical competence. ICP can aptly serve this cause, calling pastoral attention to educative process and providing the educative dimension to the pastoral care in the context of an intensifying plurality in the world society. The Church in India, aware of the rising tensions in the country due to deliberate polarization efforts of certain political elements in the socio-political and cultural scenario, has a responsibility to proactively counter the divisive forces. It involves a conscious and concerted preparation of the faithful who live as a minority but still command respect and regard for the service that the faith community has done to the society at large. The proactive efforts on the part of the faith community would comprise of strengthening of the faith identity of the members, making them aware of the issues that exist around, preparing them to be open to receive and celebrate the differences that they notice within their cultural milieu as a source of enrichment, and educating them to a sincere and committed dialogue of life, faith, and action. These efforts have to be carried out as a part of the catechetical enterprise of the faith community, as these are fundamental elements of growth in faith in a context of pluriculturality. The measures to be proactive begin from within. They challenge the faith community towards an intercultural solidarity within, in relation to differences based on language, regions, and castes. Unless these are worked on, proclamation of the gospel to others would logically be rendered extraneous. ICP moves the faith community in the direction of challenging itself and growing in its maturity of faith, in order that its primary and self-defining task of proclamation be carried out with meaning and relevance. On a personal note, my passion for a lifestyle of dialogue has been imbued in me by the unity in diversity that has always been the characteristic mark of the culture of my provenance. Anything that militates against dialogue and shared commitment towards equality, fraternity, and dignity of all cannot be holy or godly. All authoritarian, hegemonic, and totalitarian tendencies are to be singled out and challenged wherever they are found. No disguise, not even that of faith or religion, can be tolerated under which divisive forces invade the peace and coexistence of persons at interpersonal, communitarian, national or international levels. A holistic growth in faith helps a person towards transcendence. That enables one to experience not only beyond but through differences the oneness of God. The Christian experience of the Trinity is precisely this experience of oneness in many, the communion of persons, the communion of every being in the ultimate. The reign of God is built on this oneness, which more than oneness is a wholeness made of diversity, multiplicity, plurality, and interactuality. A Christian hence learns in the school of Holy Trinity and the lifestyle of dialogue, self-giving, and communion that comes not from uniformity but from interactuality. Intercultural Catechetical Pedagogy is thus a practical, theologico-pedagogical communication of the good news of the reign of God, which is an incomparable and undying promise to the entire humanity. Thank you. I'm very sorry to those online for the display because halfway through it stopped. But the others here, you did have the text with you, so it was helpful. I suppose. Thank you very much for your patience.
Bene, ringraziamo il candidato per la sua presentazione. Nonostante qualche inconveniente tecnico che ovviamente non dipende da lui, è stata molto chiara, molto precisa sugli obiettivi, sulla metodologia utilizzata. Non so se l'immagine che abbiamo visto più lungamente in Tamilnadu ci sono le montagne, forse non era una montagna, ma diciamo una scalata con la fatica, no? E allora abbiamo i membri della commissione che ci aiuteranno a mettere in luce anche il valore di questa salita e anche la vetta, no? che è stata raggiunta, quindi diamo la parola al professor Antony.
Bene, buon pomeriggio. Io presento il mio giudizio in inglese, ma forse gli altri proporranno in italiano, così andiamo anche.
Va benissimo sia l'italiano che l'inglese,
Anche siamo 4 gatti che diciamo Yeah, significance of the research that you presented. I would present it in 3 or 4 headings. First is the significance of the research question itself. At the outset, I must congratulate the candidate for identifying a pertinent and complex research question and chosen an appropriate research method to address it. In the contemporary interconnected world, the experience of cultural diversity poses fundamental challenges and furnishes inestimable resources to the dynamics of catechesis as faith maturation process. Amidst escalating pluralism, can intercultural theology lead to an ever deeper understanding of faith? Can intercultural communication enhance the process of faith sharing? Can intercultural pedagogy stimulate faith development, taking stock of the lived theology of those involved? The thesis takes up the challenge of addressing these intersecting factors, namely theology, communication, and pedagogy, converging on interculturality. With the choice of an empirical method, an option of a specific ecclesial context, the dissertation establishes its delimitations. The relevance of the research method. So, the worth of a thesis depends on what you study. Is it worth studying? And how you study, what method you use to study. As mentioned above, the study employs an empirical approach appropriate for research in catechetics. Opting for a qualitative method inspired by the principles of constructivist grounded theory, the candidate has drawn up a suitable research design to analyze the current catechetical praxis at 3 interrelated levels: analysis of the catechism texts for classes 11 and 12, and then analysis of the focus group discussions involving teachers and students from a sample of 6 Catholic schools distributed in 5 different dioceses in Tamilnadu, and the analysis of personal interviews with experts whose intercultural productions have had some impact on the faith praxis of the local church. Even though he has put it in the reverse order, I prefer to present it this way. Because the intent was to study the catechetical process as it happens in the school setting. Meticulous care taken by the researcher is evident not only in the definition of the sample, but also in designing the research instruments for the 3-stage data collection. Noteworthy is the use of in vivo qualitative data analysis procedure to extract themes from texts, discussions, and interviews. The candidate must be commended, particularly for the effort made to link the theoretical framework and the findings of the empirical phase through the identification of sensitizing categories with subsequent implication for both theory and practice in the intercultural catechetical pedagogy. I will have a question on this, I will ask you later. Articulation of the dissertation, he has presented it really well, but I would make a short summary to say that I also understood what he has presented. No? So on the basis of the broad research procedure, namely empirical, critical, projective methodology, the dissertation is structured in a logical manner in 3 parts and 6 chapters. Part 1, that presents the theoretical phase, focuses in a rather comprehensive and critical manner on the fundamentals of intercultural theology and intercultural communication, which together with the essentials of intercultural pedagogy provide the basic framework for intercultural catechetical pedagogy. The lucidity with which the candidate articulates the theoretical framework is exemplary. I will ask questions here and there, you can take down, but at the end you can respond together or in any order as you wish. No? A question referring to the theoretical part, which also has implications for the empirical phase. Language as a system of audio and written codes is the most sophisticated and abstract feature of culture. You have addressed this question in different ways in the theory and also in praxis, or as empirical analysis. In fact, the thesis records at least 172 times the word language, and also the word Tamil as referring to language and culture 362 times in the text, including the appendix, of course. So you have analyzed English and Tamil textbooks, you have analyzed English and Tamil interviews and group discussions. So my question is, what is the distinctive significance of language for the intercultural theologizing, communicating, and catechizing? It is there. No, you can. I'm just posing the question now that you can explicitate it further. No, you've already presented, but I think you can do it further. Part 2 marks the empirical phase. Enunciates the grounded theory method in terms of its characteristics and components, highlighting the choices made by the researcher among the possible variants to collect data from the catechism textbooks, focus group discussions, and the personal interviews. and it's a very good synthesis of the methodology, grounded theory method. It's a very complex method, but he has managed to make a good synthesis and also make choices relevant for his own research. Perhaps the most intriguing and innovative part of the research is a grounded theory method of codifying the data employing in vivo software. The complex process of data analysis gives rise to the indicators of intercultural pedagogy in the context of the church in Tamilnadu. And I must say, from what you have presented in the appendix and also in the text, the analysis is thorough and sophisticated. I'm also learning in this. I'm more used to I can say, the quantitative method, qualitative analyzing the text. Yes, I have done, but not with in vivo. And for me, it was a learning process too. So, on the basis of what you have done in the empirical side, I would ask you another question. Now, among the sensitizing categories resulting from the theory, you have listed the sensitizing categories that emerge. Which one finds a clear confirmation in the data analysis? In fact, you have presented saying that the three of them, three basic dimensions, find the kind of impact or find they emerge in the data. But if you want to go a little further, going into detail, which of the three emerges more clearly from the data? Because since you are involved in theory and data, maybe you tend to see everything. But from the details you have given, which sensitizing category finds a basis or confirmation in the data? And among the new elements that emerge, you have identified them as context and condition. Among these elements, which is more relevant to the theory? They may not be explicitly in the theory, but taking into account we are talking about a theory of catechetical pedagogy. Any element, even specific elements within the context of the condition that you would say is a good result that emerges strongly from the data analysis. What you offered us is a kind of a synthesis, but certainly there are details and that we can note as we read your text. And it's good for them also to take note of that. And in part three, the researcher, taking a projective perspective, creatively reconstructs the fundamental elements of the intercultural pedagogy on the basis of the findings emerging from the empirical analysis. This in turn, is then further concretized in terms of strategies and indicators for shaping the praxis of intercultural pedagogy. Here again, another question. Here, maybe I can narrate something that is happening in our communities these days, of in the COVID situation, when we celebrate Mass and reach the point of sharing the sign of peace. Some who preside over don't know what to do. They skip that part. Others say, share some sign of peace. Others, also use what we use in India or in the Oriental context, to share the sign of peace. Now, cultural difference. I can see the embarrassment that people feel when they come to that point of the Mass. Whether to say it or not to say it, whether to do it or not to do it. Cultural difference, as you also mentioned in the last chapter, the pedagogical aspect, because of his difference, can play an interruptive role. It can interrupt the normal way of doing things. So my question is, in what way cultural differences in the catechetical process that you presented play an interruptive role, and how they can contribute to faith development? Did you notice anything specifically emerging as a kind of an interruptive element that could function positively? For example, this sign where you give sign of peace or not, it is interrupted. And it can become an element for faith development. Whether you're using a namaste sign or not, it can provoke you to discover what are we here for, what do we mean by peace. So a question like that, does it emerge? So you can respond, and then I will conclude with a few things.
Thank you, Father. I noted down 4 questions in all. If I miss out something, you can.
There are only 3, but anyway. Yes, you know more.
Thank you very much, Father. First of all, as Father himself said, when I proposed to Father about the qualitative research method, though he was not very at home with it, he told me directly, I'm not very at home with the qualitative method, I am more with quantitative, but you can go ahead. I want to also journey with you and find out what it is. And I think that was a beautiful gesture on his part. Also, the openness to learn, which is there, which I really admire, and I was inspired by that, and I would like to thank Father at this moment, because I would not have another moment to thank you for this. Because that actually determined the entire work. As Father rightly pointed out, it determined the methodology of the entire research, and it was a starting point, and therefore it was something good. To begin with, the distinctive significance of language that Father was mentioning about, and it is, as Father said, it is there in between, but during our discussions also, many a times we used to have this discussion, and Father was very particular about it. And I believe that language has a very big role in our culture. Most of the time, our culture is identified not absolutely, but to the major part to the language. When we say Indian culture, many of us from India, we begin to wonder what is Indian culture. Because there is nothing called Indian culture. Because in India there are so many parts. And how do we know those parts? By language. India is divided into states on the basis of language. And those states which are based or divided into language are actually people or communities which have a particular kind of a culture, derivatives of a particular culture, not one single monologous culture, and therefore language has a big say. And as Father also said, the whole idea of the interculturality begins from understanding or entering into the language of the other. Not exactly the written language or the spoken language, but the very expression of it. And that is what I have tried to mention quite a few times in the thesis. When we say language, we are not talking about the spoken language, the words. We are not talking about the written language, the words again. But we are talking about that communication, that attitude, the whole mentality, the epistemology with which a person, kind of goes ahead in life, how the person thinks, how the person constructs knowledge for oneself, how the person looks at the world, how the person makes sense of the society. All this is language. And therefore, when we look at our children for example, in the interviews and in the focus group discussions, most of them spoke in Tamil, most of them. There were 2 schools among the 6, also English medium schools, little, let us say, upper middle class students and above. They were trying to kind of switch between English and Tamil. And why I am saying this is, I could see a considerable difference in the thought pattern of these city-based schools where there was more English used to a village-based school where there was Tamil, absolutely. No, I can even mention the place, for those who know and those who listen also. The city, for example, in Chennai, the city of Chennai and the city of Pondicherry, there were two schools. The way they looked at things, the way they looked at interculturality, the way they looked at faith, because I never spoke to them about interculturality at all. The methodology of grounded theory requires that we leave them free, we don't bias them, we don't give them the bias, we leave them free to talk. So all that they were told was, say something about your catechesis, say something about your catechism classes, the process of catechesis in your school, that's all. And that was what was asked from them. So, but reflecting on it from my perspective, the mentality of interculturality, or the mentality of openness to the other, the mentality of learning from the other, the mentality of contributing to the other seems a little more stronger in the city than in a village setup. The idea is very clear also because an additional language, they have their basis in Tamil, an additional language of English and the sophistication, the level of sophistication that they have with the language of English opens them up to another world. And therefore, there is a kind of interaction within themselves of two different worlds, which I found was very interesting. That is one thing that I would like to share. The second thing is about the sensitizing categories and how they come across in the entire idea. As I already presented in the thing also, but still I would like to say, from the 4 or the 5 core categories that we had, if you see the highest number of references is in the 4th core category. I think this table is in page 9 of your text if you want to see. Core categories and categories of ICP at a glance. If you see the catechetical process adapted to the present, the present scenario, that was the highest. And therefore, when it came to the prominence of these sensitizing, I'm mixing up with the sensitizing categories. Among the sensitizing categories, the 10 categories that we had, we see that cohesive exchange of faith was one category which was very, very strong. That is, I was sharing with Father also personally during our discussion. The teachers, when we spoke and all that, they were very positive about the catechism class, catechesis, the process of catechesis. To an extent, not prominently, but some of the students, Catholic students, they said, we are not very happy with the catechism class in the school. I was a bit surprised, and I tried to prod them with a few more. So I asked them, why do you think? They said, this catechism or catechesis, there they call it catechism, the classes, the catechesis, the process of catechesis, there the term used is catechism, not the text, but the process. Okay, so they say, this catechesis in the school divides us. The catechesis divides us. And I was more interested, so I prodded them a little more and they shared with this experience. See, in a typical Catholic school in Tamilnadu, the percentage of Catholics in the class will be, let us say, 20% at the most. I am very positive about it, okay, 20%. Whereas the others are the rest of the 80%. So when it comes to daily schedule of classes, the first hour is catechesis. And what happens is, all the Catholic students have to get up and go for their class. And the rest of them are taken another class called value education. So they said, every time this catechesis comes, we have to get up from our own friends in the class and go away. So they look at us as separate. These Catholic students are separate. They are one group. We are the other. So it divides us. Our relationship with the rest of our friends is, interrupted or disturbed because of this catechesis. And that was a very interesting kind of an observation that they made, which actually comes into that. That's where I am coming. Cohesive expression of faith, where they want to live their faith. All of them are very convinced of their Catholic faith, but they don't want a division on the basis of faith. They want that expression of faith to be very cohesive. That we need to live together. Be Christians, be Catholics, yes, but we want to live together. And that is a very beautiful mindset that a traditional India has. And we are very unhappy that is being lost just now.
Just to go to the last question.
The last question?
Yeah, about interrupting.
The cultural differences and the interruptive role that they play. And this is a very prominent learning also from the Intercultural Catechetical Pedagogy. Also in the Intercultural Pedagogy itself. One author, Giesta, he speaks of a pedagogy that is called Interruptive Pedagogy. That is what this concept is all about. That is a holistic pedagogy. A new learning happens only when a person is interrupted in his or her conceptualization. And something comes and disturbs your mind, it goes. Now, coming to the research itself and how this interruptive pedagogy plays a role in the culture by way of cultural differences, very idea of the language itself coming back again, resting on the same trace of thought. The language itself with which we celebrate the Eucharist, is considered today something taken for granted in our situation. But when I explain to them that here in our context we celebrate in Italian, they said, in Italian? How will you celebrate in Italian? That was one question. I remember once, last year, we invited one of our own confreres only, not an English-speaking confrere, but another confrere, to one of our English masses, and he was there to the end of the mass. And at the end of the mass, though it was jokingly, at the end of the mass, as we were getting out of the church, he was saying, I wonder, non lo so che questa messa è valida. You were saying, whether this mass is really valid in a language so profane, you were saying. No, I'm saying, the kind of mentality, it's an interruption, though he was saying it jokingly, but still, the idea of the interruption that comes, the new learning that comes, is really very, very helpful. Another experience I would like to share is about another confrere who was just telling me, just recently, I have the habit of, when I leave the church, I have the habit of bowing to the tabernacle instead of genuflecting, and he stood like that and then asked me, now tell me, what does that mean? Then I told him, the two hands coming together is the union of the entire self, and then I keep it as higher as possible. Usually I keep it here for God. Now I keep it as high as possible and I bow to tell the Lord, I unite myself totally in obeisance to you. That is the kind of the thought that is there in that gesture. And he said, lovely, so lovely it is. And I was impressed by that expression that he was giving. So lovely it is. And that is a new learning. In his culture, maybe that is not, the genuflection is another kind of a gesture altogether, whereas this is a different kind of a gesture altogether. But when we share the faith expressions, it really helps them to, break the traditional expressions and learn new things.
Okay. So I will conclude with the final part of the evaluation. Because others also have other questions to ask you. So it was only to warm him up. He is warm enough to respond to the others. The scientific character of the present dissertation is evident in the comprehensive theoretical framework, in the findings established through rigorous use of appropriate methods of data collection and analysis, and in the critical and creative interpretation. On the basis of these observations, we may conclude that the scientific character of this dissertation meets the required standard. Coming to the more formal and technical aspects of the dissertation, it must be underscored that the typographical presentation is excellent. This is also true with regard to the scientific apparatus utilized. In other words, the bibliography and the footnotes testify to the meticulous care and attention with which the research has been undertaken. Moreover, the candidate has painstakingly compiled a wealth of supplementary information in the footnotes. Reading through the dissertation, one cannot fail to notice the command that the candidate has of the English language. He's also good in Tamil. He's a good preacher. My family, we were in the same parish, so they always tell me, see how he preaches, why don't you preach like him? So he's good in Tamil as well. Overall, the candidate is to be congratulated for the dedication with which he has undertaken the research and brought it to a successful completion. With the mastery, conviction, and enthusiasm shown in this dissertation, the candidate is certainly well equipped to make further qualified contributions in the field of catechetics in general and in that of intercultural catechetical pedagogy in particular. I'm also happy, it's the last term. I do have a personal reason for being content and happy today. In 1993, I presented my empirical research on inculturation in the Catholic schools in Tamilnadu. And here we have an empirical research on interculturation or interculturality in Catholic schools that takes a giant step forward. So congrats. Thank you.
Bene, grazie. Si è conclusa la presentazione con una nota personale, è anche bello aver sentito questa nota personale da parte del professor Antony, che ringraziamo. La parola al professor Curro.
Buonasera a tutti. Posso cambiare lingua, sì. Mi fa piacere essere in questo contesto perché ho apprezzato moltissimo il lavoro ed è bello discutere a partire da questo lavoro. Parto anch'io un po' dal giudizio che ho espresso e poi ti pongo qualche questione. Dunque, il lavoro sottende una ricerca lunga e laboriosa, realizzata con dedizione, serietà e con impegno appassionato. Si vede che dietro c'è un lavoro davvero molto intenso e molto lungo. E io dico subito che il risultato finale mi sembra davvero molto buono. Il testo è ben curato, attesta uno spirito analitico e una grande cura metodologica, come è stato sottolineato. L'argomento è svolto in modo completo e in modo articolato. Emerge una figura di pedagogia catechetica interculturale in rapporto ad un contesto culturale specifico, Tamilnadu, che sfida particolarmente ad un approccio educativo catechetico interculturale. La tesi comunque ha un valore che va al di là del contesto specifico, appunto perché emerge un modello, una figura di pedagogia catechetica interculturale. Il procedimento metodologico è coerente, risponde alla logica della ricerca catechetica e della ricerca in teologia pastorale o pratica e si articola attorno ai tre momenti che sono stati evidenziati. Innanzitutto si offre un quadro teorico con i tratti fondamentali dove emerge gradualmente emergono i tratti fondamentali di una pedagogia catechetica interculturale, Si realizza poi un'analisi empirica condotta con serietà e con attenzione metodologica e si prospettano infine di orientamenti pratici. Tra l'altro ho apprezzato che la prima parte fosse quella più teoretica, nel senso che esprime meglio il fatto che noi, anche quando guardiamo la realtà, la guardiamo in realtà non in modo neutro, ma a partire da presupposti teoretici, che è bene, come dire, chiarire bene. Globalmente, quali sono gli aspetti più significativi di questa ricerca? Ne emergono tanti, io ne sottolineo due in particolare. Ho apprezzato molto questa capacità di mettere in correlazione ambiti disciplinari diversi che concorrono per una pedagogia catechetica interculturale. Hai creato una correlazione molto interessante, in modo corretto, credo, tra la teologia interculturale, la comunicazione interculturale e la pedagogia interculturale. E l'altro aspetto che mi sembra fondamentale, così pensando globalmente alla ricerca, c'è una prospettiva pratica nella proposta, cioè la pedagogia catechetica interculturale si configura come una pratica all'interno della quale si raccolgono attenzioni diverse, attenzioni relazionali, attenzioni dialogiche, attenzioni relative all'integralità della persona e attenzioni relative al rispetto, alla reciproca accoglienza tra le culture. Siccome io sono il correlatore, però dovevo cercare qualche aspetto problematico, no? E devo dire che ho fatto fatica un po' a trovarlo rimanendo nella prospettiva della ricerca. E allora sono andato un po' sui fondamenti della ricerca stessa. Naturalmente questo che dico adesso esprime delle sensibilità mie sulla catechesi, sul modo di impostare questi problemi. Dico in generale, come dire, qualche aspetto che a partire dalla mia sensibilità si poteva sottolineare di più e poi esprimo questo attraverso qualche domanda. Io penso che si poteva attivare forse un confronto più intenso con la comprensione ecclesiale attuale della catechesi. Si fa molto riferimento per esempio al nuovo direttorio per la catechesi e a come viene pensata la catechesi nella Chiesa. Tu giustamente sottolinei il rapporto fra catechesi ed evangelizzazione, l'orientamento carismatico nella catechesi attuale, però proprio a partire dalla tua preoccupazione dell'interculturalità, forse si potevano problematizzare di più questi orientamenti attuali della catechesi. Così anche un aspetto che avrei, non dico desiderato di più, ma come dire, mi ha un po' fatto pensare, forse una riflessione, un confronto un po' più forte anche con la catechetica europea, anche con la tradizione dell'UPS, dell'Istituto di Catechetica. Mi sarei aspettato qualcosetta di più in questo senso. Naturalmente sto parlando da europeo per modo di dire, perché sono siciliano, sono quasi africano, ma è chiaro che è un'altra prospettiva rispetto a quella indiana. E un altro elemento, forse un confronto un po' più forte con la riflessione teologica connessa con la catechesi, in modo particolare con alcune tematiche di teologia della rivelazione, di teologia dell'educazione. Ecco, però ripeto, questo lo dico a partire da alcune mie sensibilità, andando più sui fondamenti del lavoro, piuttosto che sul procedimento e sulla prospettiva del lavoro, che davvero è impeccabile per certi versi, è un lavoro davvero molto attento. E allora a partire da queste ultime osservazioni provo a farti qualche domanda. Anch'io ho 3 domande fondamentalmente, che forse sono collegate tra di loro. A dire il vero lo faccio anche un po' nella prospettiva di una ricerca che so che continua e quindi può essere utile indicare un po' delle prospettive. Io ho 3 questioni. La prima è una questione di tipo antropologico, la seconda è una questione più teologica o di teologia della catechesi, la terza è una questione specificamente catechetica. La prima, tu spesso nella tesi accenni, fai riferimento esplicitamente al luogo, allo spazio in cui si incontrano le culture. Per esempio mi sono segnato qui a pagina 8, a pagina 139, ma anche in altri punti. La mia questione è dove si incontrano le culture, su quale terreno si incontrano le culture, proprio per dare fondamento alla problematica interculturale, e mi pongo il problema se non si debba approfondire un po' di più il fondamento antropologico del dialogo interculturale. Dove si incontrano le culture? Si incontrano su un piano di valori, ci sono dei valori comuni, su un piano di contenuti, su un piano di visioni, si incontrano su un piano relazionale. Ho apprezzato molto alcune attenzioni alla dimensione relazionale. Per esempio a pagina 466 si dice l'interculturalità è prima di tutto relazione. Ho apprezzato molto anche le aperture sulla dimensione estetica, sensibile. A pagina 87 si parla della dimensione estetica della teologia interculturale. A pagina 224 la dimensione affettiva della catechesi. Mi sembrano delle aperture molto importanti. La mia domanda è se non bisogna affondare un po' di più su questo. In fondo, non ci incontriamo su un piano davvero antropologico e a partire anche da sfide comuni. Cioè, in fondo, al di là delle culture o prima del definirci appartenenti ad una cultura, abbiamo delle sfide comuni. Per esempio, quei dilemmi che ci mette davanti Papa Francesco nell'Evangelii Gaudium, la cultura dello scarto o quella dell'accoglienza, il Dio denaro o l'incontro, oppure delle prospettive legate all'abitare la casa comune, oppure penso all'ultimo capitolo della Fratelli Tutti, le religioni a servizio di una fraternità universale. Non c'è da sondare questo terreno, che è un terreno di sfide comuni, un terreno dove, come dire, siamo interconnessi gli uni con gli altri su un piano profondamente umano. La teologia interculturale, la comunicazione interculturale, la pedagogia interculturale sono, come dicevo prima, sono messe insieme in modo molto bello, in una prospettiva ermeneutica. C'è questa ottica di interdisciplinarietà e di ermeneutica, ma non c'è una sfida di transdisciplinarietà e una sfida proprio ad abitare questo terreno più antropologico. Pensiamo al virus, per esempio. Non è che va a vedere la cultura, no? Ma passa da un corpo all'altro, non c'è una intercorporeità con cui dobbiamo riconciliarci un po' tutti quanti. Questo andava un po' fuori, me ne rendo conto, dalla prospettiva della tua ricerca, però mi sembra una questione da tenere viva. Non so se metto subito le altre 2 questioni in modo breve. La seconda questione è una questione più strettamente teologica. C'è un confronto con le linee di fondo del direttorio della catechesi, però secondo me il confronto poteva essere un po' più approfondito, o dovrebbe essere in futuro più approfondito, ripeto, come dire, è più una cosa di prospettiva. La catechesi è considerata nel processo dell'evangelizzazione, no? Nell'attuale pensiero ecclesiale. Tu approfondisci questo tema, approfondisci il rapporto fra catechesi e cherigma, la dimensione cherigmatica della catechesi, che intercettano gli orientamenti attuali, riproposti anche dal direttorio per la catechesi. Ma la questione della dialogicità, la questione veramente della reciprocità e quindi dell'interculturalità, non mette un po' in discussione per certi versi questo modello? Cioè non parliamo troppo di evangelizzazione in termini un po' unilaterali qualche volta e dobbiamo riconciliarci più profondamente con un orizzonte di reciprocità, no? È possibile pensare il cherigma, una catechesi cherigmatica, direi un processo di evangelizzazione dentro dinamiche veramente dialogiche? Questo mi sembra che a partire dalla tua preoccupazione sia, come dire, qualche cosa di importante che può arrivare con la riflessione catechetica attuale. E poi l'altra questione che a me sembrerebbe importante approfondire è la questione della rivelazione, no? Nel direttorio si parla di catechesi a partire dalla rivelazione con una certa problematicità, nel senso che qualche volta la rivelazione è questa iniziativa di amore di Dio, qualche volta è in qualche modo un contenuto e quindi si rischia di cadere in logiche un po' unilaterali. Tu ad un certo momento, a pagina 143, dici: la teologia interculturale apre una persona, una comunità di fede a una profonda e speciale rivelazione di Dio in e attraverso le culture e le persone che abitano in essa. È una affermazione molto importante questa, che secondo me potrebbe essere approfondita proprio in ottica teologica e potrebbe porre degli interrogativi a una certa teologia della rivelazione che sottostà alla catechesi e che rischia di non rendere conto pienamente del fatto che Dio mi parla attraverso l'altro anche, no? E quindi dare il senso che l'altro non è soltanto il punto di arrivo, ma è il luogo da dove Dio mi parla, no? La terza questione, rapidissimamente, era semplicemente come dire, come mai non ti sei confrontato con alcuni autori, anche occidentali, anche molto vicini a noi? Adesso non faccio nomi perché qualcuno è anche in sala, non voglio come dire, escludere nessuno, però c'è una riflessione attenta alla cultura, certo non in senso magari specifico, nel rapporto riflettivo della tua tesi, però una riflessione europea anche molto attenta a queste questioni. Faccio un nome per tutti: André Fossione, per esempio, poco valorizzato, ma non è soltanto della Fossione, è una cosa più generale. Però ripeto questo mio intervento a partire da un giudizio molto positivo e so che per certi versi vado un po' oltre la tesi in senso stretto, proprio perché una bella tesi si può problematizzare sopra.
Thank you very much, Father. Thank you for the observations and thank you for the question also. And thank you also for the encouragement during the process of the work. Just in short, responding to all the three questions. First question, you were talking about the common space, the third space, as I use it very often, tertia terra nita. That is the kind of concept that is emerging in interculturality. As Father was mentioning at the end of his observations about inculturation and interculturation, I see this as one of the most important, prominent addition to inculturation. Inculturation is already a big task that the church has in the process of evangelization and in the process of announcing the gospel to the world. The process of inculturation itself is not over yet. It is going on still. And interculturation adds this element of the third space as the most important element, as Father has rightly underlined. And I would like to say the key element here in this third space is all about relationship. As I have mentioned quite a few times in the thesis also, relationship and shared responsibility, mutuality and interactuality, that is one word, though it is not an English word, it is not there in English, but I wanted to use that word, interactuality, as the capacity to interact. Because it is in that capacity to interact that we can concretely say or concretely feel what culture is. A culture is something that is in the air. You can't see culture. Where do I see culture? Where do I experience culture? I experience culture in the way I live. Where do I really see myself living? When I am living in contact with the other. And therefore the other becomes the mirror. The other becomes the possibility for me to encounter the culture that I have. I don't understand, I don't realize my culture until I meet the other. That is why relationship and shared responsibility, mutuality and interactuality have been, kind of the basis there in the entire idea. And therefore, in fact, I do accept that it could be my way of looking at it, and it would be your way of looking at it, that the amount of common challenges that are proposed are not sufficient. But I do see in this mutuality and interactuality all the possibilities of the common challenges that can be proposed. Secondly, about catechesis in the process of evangelization, as you rightly said, the new directory takes this proposal a little more stronger than the old directory. As we see, this process began from Evangelii Nuntiandi onwards. Evangelii Nuntiandi already started this idea of looking at catechesis within the process of evangelization, and not as a process that follows evangelization. There is no chronological division between evangelization and catechesis. That was a kind of a thought that was begun by Evangelii Nuntiandi, and we see this directory is taken it very seriously, and I did try my best to bring that perspective inside, as you have pointed out. And the question of dialogue, the dialogue as the key to the entire thing with regard to kerygma, with regard to revelation. And I believe in that, and I have also mentioned that quite a few times, referring to the pedagogy of God as the model for intercultural catechetical pedagogy. Pedagogy of God beginning with the revelation, and beginning with the revelation where, as you said, the Lord takes that initiative. The first step is taken by God. And that is how the entire relationship, interaction, and the possibilities of interculturality is my responsibility. Each one has to take that as their responsibility. And therefore, catechesis as intercultural catechetical pedagogy, what catechesis has to do to persons is to make them understand and become aware that it is their responsibility to build up dialogue. And that is what God teaches us through revelation, I feel. Revelation is that first step taken by God to dialogue with humanity. And that dialogue has to be reflected in our way of catechizing and our way of living our faith also. And the kerygma itself, as you said, I have also given enough weightage, I think, to kerygma, but also every time mentioned, when we say kerygma, we are not talking about some conceptual truth. Yes, it is the message of God. Yes, it is the message of the person of God, and it is the message, the salvific message that is revealed to us in Jesus Christ. Yes, all that is true. It is conceptual, but more than that, kerygma is the very way God relates to us, and the message that is involved in that relationship of God. The message that God gives us, that I love you, and I have sent my son for you. My son died for you. and my son has saved you. That is the kind of charisma that we need to insist on when we talk about intercultural catechetical. Not about one undivided, yeah, all that is important, yes. But more than that, what is important is that God communicates. And that communication is what I would like to really draw out of kerygma as the communication of God. Yes, the message of God, but more than that, it is a communication of God, and that communication of God becomes a lifestyle of living our Christian faith. Finally, authors, I do accept the limitation of not having, and it is very difficult to bring in all the authors possible, also because I didn't want to sound too Western and too European also, but still we can't avoid the major names, so I had used a few. I could have overlooked. Now I can, okay. As Father Bisoni said, I can now update the entire theoretical framework. Thank you, Father.
Grazie al professor Currò, diamo la parola al professor Mazzoni.
Grazie, posso dire tranquillamente che io sono last and least e sarò anche breve. Il tema scelto dal candidato riguarda la pedagogia catechetica interculturale applicata al contesto multiculturale del Tamilnadu. Nonostante la complessità metodologica che richiedeva un approccio interdisciplinare navigando tra teologia e scienze umane, cioè come abbiamo sentito Intercultural Theology, Intercultural Communication, Intercultural Pedagogy, il candidato è riuscito a fare un'ottima dissertazione in 3 anni, un progetto della tesi essendo stato approvato dalla Facoltà di Teologia il 15 giugno 2018. Il lavoro non si limita solo all'approccio teorico e all'analisi empirica della situazione, ma propone opportunamente alcune linee strategiche e criteriologiche per l'attuazione concreta della pedagogia catechetica interculturale. Così abbiamo seguito nella presentazione le 3 parti dedicate alla Theoretical Framework e poi alla Empirical Analysis e infine Projectual Perspectives. Dal punto di vista metodologico il lavoro appare ben strutturato ed è corredato di una buona documentazione basata sulle fonti magisteriali e sugli studi ad hoc, pur potendosi giustificare per la complessità del tema e dell'approccio metodologico. La dissertazione risulta molto ampia rispetto alla media consentita. Si pensi che nella facoltà di teologia di queste bisognerebbe avere intorno a 300 pagine, invece la tesi siamo a più di 700. Però le eccezioni anche esistono. E poi per quanto riguarda i meriti, credo sono stati sottolineati, direi è questa cultura dell'incontro che viene declinata sulla falsariga dell'interdisciplinarità e dell'interculturalità. Una piccola forse cosa, anche forse dovuta anche alla sensibilità mia, avevo fatto anche a suo tempo al candidato questa osservazione, soprattutto riguardo al 5° capitolo, nei paragrafi 2.1 Building Relationships, Koinonia, oppure 4.2 The People of God, The Catechizing and The Catechized. Si può fondare teologicamente un po' di più, perché c'è una cena alla pagina 416, si può fondare di più la missione di tutto il popolo di Dio per la catechesi, accennando al sacerdozio comune e alla triplice funzione sacerdotale, profetica e legale, in virtù dei sacramenti di iniziazione. Secondo me questo è il fondamento che rende i fedeli protagonisti della comunione organica, in quanto popolo di Dio, corpo di Cristo e Tempio dello Spirito, capace di agire in modo sinodale. La sinodalità, appunto accennata nel quinto capitolo della terza parte, andrebbe, a mio modo di vedere, sviluppata alle pagine 384, 387 Building Relationships. C'è un accenno alla pagina 386, però noto che in tutte più di 700 pagine la parola synodality è un effapax che si incontra solo alla pagina 422. Prima di una piccola breve conclusione faccio 3 domande correlate, probabilmente si potrà risolvere anche in poche parole. Alla luce delle indicazioni metodologiche del lavoro fatto, come distinguere una semplice pedagogia inculturata dalla pedagogia catechetica interculturale? Nel sottofondo ovviamente c'è la problematica tra inculturazione e interculturalità. Dunque, come si può distinguere una semplice pedagogia inculturata dalla pedagogia catechetica interculturale? Seconda domanda, forse simile alla seconda del professor Furò sulla rivelazione e la fede. Così come è configurata, la pedagogia catechetica interculturale riesce a conservare la trascendenza del Vangelo nel processo catechistico? Anche qui si tratta dei contenuti della tesi. L'ultima domanda, non so se non sia un pregiudizio mio, ma ho avuto piuttosto l'impressione, poi finendo la considerazione di tutta la tesi, anche vedendo tutto sommato la situazione del Tamilnadu e dell'India, che la problematica maggiore non è la cultura né le culture, ma piuttosto le religioni. Penso all'induismo, Islam e cristianesimo. Quindi, se non vado fuori binario, chiederei questo. Riguardo al contesto del Tamilnadu, si può prospettare una pedagogia catechetica interreligiosa che è forse più urgente di quella interculturale? Ecco, sono queste piccole 3 domande.
Thank you, Father, for your observations and also for your appreciation always and all the encouragement during the process of the work. To start with the pedagogy, what would be the difference between an ordinary pedagogy and intercultural catechetical pedagogy? There are a few things that I have mentioned here which I would like to highlight. First is about intercultural learning. There are a set of 4 dimensions that are highlighted in the text also, which is very important as intercultural learning, which becomes basis for intercultural pedagogy. And that would be to begin with concrete experience, which would also be there in an inculturated pedagogy. Reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and comes the last, which is the active experimentation. And that is where the entire stress of interculturality goes. And even in the directory just now, even in the previous directory and this directory also of catechesis, there is a point that is mentioned about the coherence of methodology in the formation of the catechist and in the entire process of catechesis. No? So it is not that we form people theoretically in one way, and then when it comes to praxis, when it comes to ordinary practice, we have a set of ways of doing. No, that cannot be. And that is why this 4th element becomes very important, and interculturality in the process of formation already ensures interculturality in the way of life. And as aims of intercultural pedagogy, which is very special, we have the promoting interaction, creating common space. Again, coming back to what I was responding to when Father Kuro was asking about creating common space, which becomes a very important element of interculturality and developing intercultural competences and challenging the transformation of individuals and community. This is again another element of interculturality. And certain elements that I have proposed also here, some models of education, pedagogy that could be very easily an aid for intercultural pedagogy are emancipatory education model, by Habermas and company. And then we have the problem posing education, where we have Paulo Freire as a prominent element. And then the dialogic pedagogy, where Mikhail Bakhtin and the other people come. And then integrative discovering model, where there is the entire idea of trying to bring in the experience and the learning together. These are some let us say not merely inspiration but foundations for intercultural catechetical pedagogy. And therefore, in the process of catechesis, with the methodology of intercultural catechetical pedagogy, what we would concentrate on would be these dimensions that would differentiate it from inculturating pedagogy. The third question about interreligious, I will come to the second question later. The interreligious pedagogy or intercultural pedagogy. The dimension of interreligiosity is already there in intercultural pedagogy, and therefore specifically interreligious would be to reducing the entire dimension to this kind of a pedagogy. Instead, an intercultural pedagogy would be more liberating, more integrative, I feel personally. Also because it is true, but the point is very valid, what Father is saying, because of the multi-religious context in which we find ourselves. But the fact is, it is not only about the religion that disturbs our faith expressions in India. It is also our own cultural expressions within the church. Because, let us say, many or most of the Christians who are living their faith have a very strong culture that belongs to the land. And therefore, the cultural elements that come into the expression of faith make a big difference. And therefore, even within the church, and this is what I intended to when I proposed intercultural catechetical pedagogy, it is more formation of our own future generation or the present generation towards building a community that is holistic, a community that is more, let us say, integrated. The second question I have not answered, not because I didn't want to answer, but I missed the second question. Can you repeat the second question?
Era semplicemente intorno alla trascendenza, la pedagogia catechetica interculturale riesce a conservare la trascendenza del Vangelo, a cui ha accennato anche finendo la presentazione, poi anche il professor Curò ha accennato a questo aspetto della teologia della liberazione. Sì. Come salvare questo aspetto delicato da questo punto di vista?
Very, very true. Intercultural catechetical pedagogy is, as we said right from the beginning till the end, there is one element that is being repeated again and again, and that is being holistic. So looking at our own faith living also from a holistic perspective, looking at our faith expressions from a holistic perspective, it is not about leaving away the fundamentals or leaving out the fundamentals and going to our own specificities. No, it is not that. It is about going beyond the specificities, going beyond those fundamentals to live a life that is holistic, where everything has its place. And within this intercultural perspective or this intercultural perspective, we find this is what we need to insist on in our own youngsters. In our context also, there is a difficulty we have because the non-Catholic Christians are equal in number and percentage as the Catholics in India. We are, let us say, officially almost 3% of the population, Christians, of which 1.5% will be Catholic. The other 1.5% will be the non-Catholic Christians. The non-Catholic Christians who are, I don't want to be judgmental, but I say, who are very vociferous about Christian faith, the message of salvation, the Bible, the Gospels, the proclamation. What about relationship with the other? What about your cordial relationship? What about the other social issues that are there? That doesn't matter. I'm a Christian, and that identity has to be taken taken seriously. And therefore, whenever I go into the community, I go as a Christian, and therefore in opposition to a Hindu or a Muslim or somebody else who is there. Intercultural Catechetical Pedagogy would ensure, or at least dream of, creating real believers who go there with a relationship, who go there with cordiality. Yes, I am a Christian, and that makes me not opposed to you, but more obliged to love you, more obliged to accept you. And that is what I feel the transcendence is all about. And there I feel this dichotomy of maintaining my identity and relating to the other, respecting the difference that the other has, doesn't exist at all. That way I'll be able to create a community that is more holistic and more united and integrated. Thank you for the opportunity.
Bene, grazie. Adesso ci riuniamo con la Commissione per completare la valutazione e poi facciamo la proclamazione del mio dottore. Grazie.
La Commissione che abbiamo... Grazie, molto bene. Scuola che
இதுக்கு லிங்க் அனுப்பிச்சிடலாம் லிங்க் யூடியூப்பில் தான் இருக்கு நீங்கள் டவுன்லோட் பண்ணுங்கள் லிங்க் மாத்திரம் அதிலே பார்த்துக்கலாம் ஷூர்
vibrante,
Tocca ancora quando non sei dottore. Sì, un secondo prima di essere e poi dopo dovremo.
Sì.
Comunque, no, grazie, wonderful. No, io su una cosa sono proprio da che lui bravo a fare. Sì, sì.
Bene, allora siamo stati molto veloci, non perché il rettore deve scappare perché alle 5 è un webinar in cui deve intervenire, perché la commissione era decisamente concorde sulla qualità del lavoro fatto e anche la pertinenza della presentazione e anche delle risposte che sono state date. E noi ti facciamo le nostre congratulazioni, i migliori auguri per continuare anche tenendo conto dei suggerimenti che ti sono stati dati e per il servizio che sei chiamato a svolgere, che condividiamo, quindi doppia gioia e tanti auguri e felicitazioni. Per l'autorità a noi concessa dal Sommo Pontefice e dal Reverendissimo Gran Cancelliere dell'Università Pontificia Salesiana, a norma delle Costituzioni Apostoliche e degli Statuti dell'Università, proclamiamo Antony Christy Lord Donatan, dottore in teologia con specializzazione di pastorale giovanile e catechetica. Secondo però quanto prescrivono le Costituzioni Apostoliche e gli Statuti dell'Università, sarà insignito del titolo di dottore e fornito di diploma quando avrà stampato almeno un estratto della dissertazione e consegnato a questa università le copie prescritte. Roma, venerdì 21 maggio 2021. Felicitazioni. La parola al mio dottore per i ringraziamenti e mi scusate se adesso mi devo assentare. La foto?
Chiedo di sedersi per un momento un po' lungo, no, non è solo un po'. Carissimi, sono un po' confuso, non so da dove cominciare, ma sempre c'è l'alfa e l'omega con noi, il Signore che mi fa sentire sempre di più l'abbondanza del suo amore nonostante la mia piccolezza e fragilità. Prego e prometto che mi sforzerò di rimanere sempre grato a Lui e a tutti. Ricordo con affetto i miei genitori Lurden e Colin de Mary, che sono andati alla casa del padre negli ultimi 5 anni. Sono certo che lassù papà e mamma sono orgogliosi di questo momento molto più di me. Scendendo giù, qui in quest'aula, altrove e sul live streaming, c'è una marea di persone che mi hanno fatto riconoscere quanto io sia benedetto e ben voluto in tutta la mia vita finora. Comincio ringraziando Don Mauro Mantovani, anche se non c'è qui, Presidente della Commissione e nostro Rettore Magnifico, che si è mostrato sempre affettuoso e incoraggiante. Grazie a lui. Vorrei ringraziare dal profondo del cuore Don Francis Vincent Antony, il mio relatore, che è stato per me una continua fonte di ispirazione, un punto di riferimento e di sfida, invitandomi sempre a crescere e a maturare nei miei pensieri e nel modo di esprimerli. Grazie anche per tutto l'orizzonte di teologia empirica che mi hai aperto. Lo so che ho un lungo cammino da fare ancora, per questo continuo a contare su di te per un cammino illuminante. Grazie Don. Vorrei presentare un piccolo segno di ringraziamento a Don Francis Vincent. Don Aimable Musoni è una meraviglia come persona. Avevo fatto la mia tesi di licenza con lui 7 anni fa e sia all'epoca sia adesso si è sempre mostrato un bundle di incoraggiamento. Grazie Don per la tua chiarezza e per l'accompagnamento. conosco molto poco Don Salvatore Curò, ma anche se a distanza sono stato sempre un ammiratore dello stile cordiale dei tuoi interventi, degli scritti che ho letto e del protagonismo attivo nella Chiesa di oggi. Caro Don Curò, grazie per tutto l'accompagnamento ed ispirazione. Il nostro segretario generale è un modello di perfezione professionale. Non solo lo ammiro, ma imparo tanto da lui. Don Jarek, grazie per l'esempio. Invito per... Magari concedici un secondo per fare una foto così possono essere tranquilli dopo, no?
Don Christy, possiamo fare qua.
Oh.
Facciamo un po' di teatro.
Dottor. போடுங்க சார்.
Grazie per la vostra pazienza. Continuo i miei ringraziamenti. Vorrei ringraziare la mia comunità, la comunità di San Francesco di Sales e ogni suo membro. Tutti i confratelli mi sono stati molto vicini, mi hanno sostenuto e incoraggiato. Ringrazio in modo speciale il nostro direttore, il carissimo Don Emiro Cepeda, per la sua gentilezza e la costante comprensione. Don Emiro, ti invito a prendere questo segno di onore e di ringraziamento a nome di tutta la nostra comunità. Vorrei manifestare la mia gratitudine per la presenza di Don Maria Rokem Kanagar, nostro visitatore, e in lui vorrei ringraziare la congregazione, la visitatoria e specialmente la mia ispettoria di origine, Chennai, per questa opportunità che mi è stata data. Vorrei invitare Don Maria ad accettare questo segno di ringraziamento anche. Il mio istituto di catechetica mi ha sostenuto in vari modi, soprattutto con un continuo apprezzamento che mi spinge a donarmi senza riserve e sempre di più. Vorrei ringraziare tutti i membri dell'istituto, il direttore Don Ubaldo Montisci, Don Corrado Pastore, Don Giuseppe Ruta, Don Cesare Bisogli, Don Francesco Zulaica e Don Giuseppe Biancardi, Prego Don Montici a voler accettare questo segno di riconoscimento a nome di tutto l'Istituto.
Devo adesso puoi lavorare.
No.
Vorrei ringraziare i due decani, Don Antonio Scudero, il decano della Facoltà di Teologia dove ho svolto il percorso dottorale, e Don Mario Oscar Lanos, il decano della Facoltà di Scienze dell'Educazione, per la quale svolgerò il mio servizio di docenza e di ricerca. Posso invitare Don Scudero e Don Janos a venire per ricevere questo piccolo segno di ringraziamento. Per favore.
Grazie a te per la tua generosità.
Ci sono tanti che stanno seguendo questo evento da lontano e anche da vicino. I miei cari della famiglia, என் அன்பு குடும்பத்தினருக்கும் சலீசிய குடும்பத்தை சார்ந்த அனைவருக்கும், என்னுடைய நேசமிக்க இளைஞர்களுக்கும், என்னுடைய நண்பர்கள் அனைவருக்கும் என்னுடைய மனமார்ந்த நன்றிகளை தெரிவித்துக் கொள்கிறேன். In questo giorno ci sono stati alcuni che sono stati molto più preoccupati di me per il buon andamento di tutto. Vorrei ringraziare il team di event management, no? Il capo Vincent Raj, John Bosco che c'è qui, e poi Jay Seelan, no? della Facoltà di Filosofia, Henry Saloraj nell'Istituto di Storia, e anche vorrei ringraziare Aruldas Ravi e Suor Genevieve che sono stati di grande aiuto nelle piccole e grandi cose. Prima di finire vorrei leggere la parte gratulatoria tratta dalla tesi perché non ci sarà un'altra opportunità di farlo. Vi chiedo un po' di pazienza per alcuni istanti. Solo un paragrafo. I acknowledge with thanks the support of a great team of collaborators, those who rendered their unconditional assistance in the process of the research. Jansi Jennifer, Malati Victor, Shirley Janet, Jennifer Sampson, Pushpa Jacinta, those who read the text with patience, Jaysilan Saurya Pichai, Juliet Mary, Dominic Savio, and those who oversaw the varied necessary arrangements for the research, Ernest Rosario, Michael Antony Suresh, Michael Raj Lazar, Tamatirutho Mirudayam, Kennedy Gladwin, Lavanya Kennedy, Julian Felix, and Amalin Seraphin. I acknowledge with respect the availability and readiness of the heads of the various institutions where I conducted the research, who made possible the data gathering, and of those who facilitated the process. Alla fine vorrei ringraziare tutti voi qui presenti per la vostra presenza adesso e la vostra vicinanza di sempre e la vostra fraterna amicizia. Siete stati molto gentili, pazienti, buoni e bravi. Grazie, che Dio vi benedica sempre. Vorrei invitarvi a concludere questo momento glorificando il Signore con me. Gloria al Padre, al Figlio e allo Spirito Santo. Maria, aiuto dei cristiani. Padre, del Figlio, dello Spirito Santo. Amen. Grazie, cuore. Grazie. C'è un piccolo rinfresco fuori, inviterei caldamente tutti per partecipare.
Yes, Father.
I'm going to She's becoming
He just finished his doctorate in Canada.
Yes, Father. Live போயிட்டு இருக்கு. So, Father, congratulations. Nice.
Grazie.
Grazie. Non ho voluto guardare tutte le cose che erano scappate, però la presentazione è positivissima.
Abbiamo il nuovo dottore qua, lo possiamo festeggiare insieme, prendendo anche la spumante da questa parte, e dopo di quello invito Don Christy a venire qua per favore. Poi abbiamo anche una torta fatta dalla scia della facoltà, anche delle allora prendete voi proprio lo spumante dell'istituto, venite qua e prendete
eliminare il fiasco.
Cantiamo insieme tanti auguri a te. Tanti auguri a te. Tanti auguri a
È finita la pagina, Farina. Padre Christy, eccomi. Grazie, grazie. Belle cose. Grazie Don. Grazie tanto. Torta e
Voi siete qua per le vostre il prossimo dottore.
சார்ஜ் ஆகலை நான் ஆன் பண்ணணுமா?
ஆன் பண்ணுது
Vedono in India.
Make some interviews. You can make some interviews. Diceva anche solo della fatto 120 lo dice che sono
ஃபாதர் பாய் சொல்லிடுறீங்களா இவங்களுக்குலாம்? மூடிடலாம், கொஞ்சம் பின்னாடி போ.
all those who are still watching, thank you very much. Thanks for the time that you spent. Thanks for so much of love and affection with which you spent the time and all the prayers. Thank you very much. God bless you all. Thank you.
ஓகே பாய்.
Finish now, live?